It was a quiet evening, the kind where the past feels closer than usual. I had just made myself a cup of tea and was settling into the silence of my living room when the doorbell rang. At first, I thought it was a delivery by mistake. But when I opened the door, my heart skipped a beat. There he was, standing under the porch light like a ghost from another lifetime. I hadn't seen him in almost 9 years. No text. No call. No explanation. Just gone. And now, without warning, he was back. No suitcase, no jacket, just the same tired eyes I remembered and a small, nervous smile that said more than words ever could. I couldn't speak. I just stared. My brain raced with questions. Why now? Where had he been all these years? What did he want from me? Before I could even invite him in, or ask him to leave, he looked at me with this strange mix of regret and hope and said, "Can I stay the night?" You know that feeling when your chest tightens, and your instincts tell you something big is about to happen? That's exactly how it felt. I didn't know whether to slam the door or pull him into a hug. Because once upon a time, this man meant everything to me. We shared dreams, secrets, and plans. He was the kind of person I thought would be in my life forever. And then, he disappeared. No goodbye. Just silence that stretched across the years like an unanswered question. And now, he was asking for shelter, under the same roof that once echoed with laughter we shared. It wasn't just a question of space. It was a question of trust. Of old wounds. Of whether someone can just walk back into your life as if nothing happened. As if time stood still. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to know why he left when I needed him most. But I also couldn't ignore the tired lines on his face or how lost he looked, like the world had chewed him up and spit him out. Something had changed in him, something I couldn't quite name. So I stepped aside. And he walked in, slowly, like he wasn't sure he was welcome. My heart was pounding, my mind buzzing. He didn't bring answers that night, just more questions. And as I closed the door behind him, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened next, it was going to change everything. What happened that night is something I never imagined I'd share publicly. But it's a story that deserves to be told. Because sometimes, the past doesn't stay in the past. It knocks on your door, looks you in the eyes, and asks for a place to stay, if only for a little while. And that's where everything truly began, again. He sat on the edge of the couch like he didn't know if he belonged there. I offered him a glass of water, and he took it with shaking hands. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt louder than any words. I watched him closely, trying to find something familiar in his face, but it was like looking at a version of him I'd never met before. He looked older, not just in years, but in weight, like life had been heavy on him. And yet, there was something in his eyes, something he hadn't lost. I finally broke the silence and asked, "Where have you been?" He looked down, took a deep breath, and said, "It's a long story." But that was all. No details. No explanation. Just that vague line that left more questions than answers. I didn't push. Not yet. I needed to understand who this man was now before I dug into why he left me all those years ago. Back then, we were inseparable. People used to say we were like two halves of the same soul. We had plans, big ones. We were supposed to travel, build a life together, maybe even start a family one day. But everything fell apart when he just vanished. No fight. No warning. Just one day he was there, and the next, gone. I went through all the stages, confusion, heartbreak, even anger. And eventually, I forced myself to move on. Or at least, I thought I had. Now, seeing him sitting there, like a stranger in his own story, brought everything flooding back. The memories, the questions, the pain I had buried deep. I wanted to know the truth. But something told me, the truth might hurt more than the silence ever did. I kept watching him from across the room, trying to read between the lines of his silence. He didn't offer much, just small glances around the living room like he was remembering something I couldn't see. He looked at the photo on the shelf, the one of me and my younger sister, and I noticed the faintest smile. "You still have that?" he asked. I nodded, unsure how to respond. That picture had been taken a week before he disappeared. It had stayed on that shelf through everything, maybe out of habit, or maybe because some part of me hadn't fully let go. He asked about my life now, where I worked, if I still painted like I used to. I gave short answers. I didn't know what he was really looking for, information or forgiveness. I couldn't give either without knowing what really happened. But he didn't ask about anyone else. Not my parents, not the people who searched for him when he vanished. That silence said more than anything he could have told me. The tension wasn't just about his return. It was about the timing. I had just started rebuilding my peace. I was seeing someone. Nothing serious yet, but real enough. And now this? It felt like opening an old wound just as it was starting to heal. I wanted to believe maybe he had a good reason. Maybe something tragic had happened that kept him away. But another part of me, the more cautious part, wondered if he had burned bridges elsewhere and was here simply because I was the last door left to knock on. He kept avoiding eye contact whenever I mentioned the past. And deep down, I knew, whatever he was hiding, it wasn't something small. It was something that could change everything. The hours passed slowly that night. He barely touched the food I made, and I barely touched my thoughts. My phone buzzed a few times, texts from Daniel, the man I'd been quietly dating. I ignored them. How could I explain any of this without sounding like I was living in a story no one would believe? An ex who disappeared for nearly a decade suddenly showing up and asking to stay the night? Even I didn't fully understand what was happening. At one point, I found him standing by the window, looking out into the dark street like he was expecting someone, or hiding from someone. I walked over quietly and asked, "Is someone looking for you?" He flinched slightly, then shook his head. "No. Not anymore." But the way he said it, it wasn't convincing. There was fear under his voice, something buried deep. And suddenly, I felt it, this wasn't just about a broken relationship. Something bigger was at play. He sat back down and finally started talking. Not the full truth, but pieces of it. Mentions of debt. A decision he made that went wrong. People he couldn't trust anymore. His words were vague, like he was afraid of saying too much. But every sentence made me more uneasy. What kind of trouble had he been in? And why bring it to my doorstep now? I started thinking, was I in danger? Had he brought something to my home that I couldn't see yet? I watched the clock as it ticked past midnight, the weight in my chest growing heavier. I didn't know if I was helping someone who needed me, or sheltering someone I shouldn't have let back in. And then, just when I thought the night couldn't get more tense, he asked me a question that changed everything. He looked me straight in the eyes and asked, "Do you still have the spare key to your parents' house?" For a second, I couldn't even process what he was asking. My mind froze. Of all the things he could have said, that was the last thing I expected. I blinked at him, unsure if I heard right. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. He stood up, started pacing, rubbing his hands together like he was working through something he didn't want to say out loud. "That place, there's something I left behind. Something important. And I need to get it back before someone else does." My chest tightened. My parents had moved away years ago. The house was still in their name, but it had been empty for months, under renovation, waiting to be sold. I still had the key in a drawer. But the way he said it. "Before someone else does," that part echoed in my head. "What did you leave there?" I asked, more firmly this time. He looked at me, jaw clenched, like he was struggling between protecting me and needing my help. "It's not what you think," he said. "It's not money, not anything illegal. It's a journal." One I kept while everything was falling apart. Names. Dates. What happened? Who was involved? If it gets into the wrong hands, I backed up a step. My heart was pounding now, the story unraveling faster than I could keep up with. Whatever life he had after he vanished, it hadn't just been difficult. It had been dangerous. And now he was dragging that danger into mine. The room suddenly felt colder. I looked toward the window, half expecting someone to be standing there. "Is someone following you?" I asked, my voice barely steady. He didn't answer. But the silence told me everything. And then came the sound, the soft crunch of gravel outside. My porch light flickered. He went completely still, his eyes locked on the front door. "They found me," he whispered. In that moment, nothing felt safe. Not my home. Not him. Not the years I spent trying to forget. And I realized, whatever secrets he brought back into my life, they were no longer just his. Now, they were mine too. I rushed to turn off the lights. He grabbed my arm and pulled me into the hallway, whispering, "Stay quiet." The look in his eyes said everything. He was terrified, and that scared me more than the unknown outside. We crouched low, hiding behind the kitchen wall. The porch light flickered again, then went out completely. A shadow moved past the window. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small USB drive. "If anything happens to me," he said, shoving it into my hand, "give this to a lawyer named Clay Mitchell. He'll know what to do." My heart was racing. "Why didn't you just go to the police?" I asked. "They're part of it," he whispered. "Some of them. That's why I disappeared. I didn't know who to trust." The knock on the door came soft, almost polite, but it chilled me to the bone. I held my breath as he peeked through the crack in the curtain. He stepped back suddenly, eyes wide. "It's not who I thought," he whispered. "It's worse." Before I could ask what that meant, he motioned for me to stay hidden and walked slowly toward the front door. He opened it just a crack, and I heard a familiar voice. "Long time, huh?" said Daniel. My heart dropped. I stepped out from the shadows. "Daniel?" I said. He turned to me with a calm, unsettling smile. "You never told me you had company tonight." That's when everything clicked. The late-night texts, the way Daniel always asked about my old memories, the way he seemed to know too much about my past. Daniel wasn't just the man I was dating. He had been looking for him the whole time. My ex stepped in front of me, shielding me. "You were working with them," he said to Daniel. Daniel raised his hands casually. "It's not personal. I just need the journal." I held up the USB drive. "You mean this?" His smile faded. And that's when the lights came back on, and red and blue flashes flooded through the windows. Sirens. Tires on gravel. Someone had called the police. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe fate. Daniel froze. My ex turned to me, eyes full of something between shock and relief. It was over. Or so I thought. But as the police cuffed Daniel and led him away, one of the officers looked at my ex and paused. "You've got a lot to answer for, too. The past never really disappears. It waits until it's ready to finish what it started." I stood in the doorway as the squad cars disappeared down the street, the flashing lights slowly fading into the night. Everything was quiet again, but nothing felt the same. My living room, which once felt safe and familiar, now held the weight of everything that had happened, of everything that had come back after years of silence. My ex sat on the couch, hands trembling, eyes distant. The officer's words still echoed in my head, "You've got a lot to answer for, too." Later, at the station, it all came out. The journal had documented a secret operation, bribes, illegal surveillance, even targeted threats against whistleblowers. My ex had gotten caught in the middle while working a low-level job at a private firm. He hadn't known what he was getting into until it was too late. When he tried to report it, he got threats. So, he vanished, leaving everyone, including me, behind. But the past always catches up. Especially when people are still trying to bury the truth. Daniel had been hired to track him down, but somewhere along the way, he got closer to me, too close. That betrayal cut deeper than I expected. I had opened my heart again, only to learn it was part of someone else's game. The authorities took the journal seriously. Investigations opened. People were arrested. My ex was cleared of most charges but would need to testify. He didn't ask me to wait for him. He knew he owed me more than I could give, and maybe I needed peace more than I needed closure. In the weeks that followed, I tried to return to normal. But something had shifted. I realized how much strength it takes to face the past, and how easily we carry the weight of unfinished stories. Sometimes, the person who shows up after years isn't there to make things right. Sometimes, they show up to show you how far you've come without them. And maybe that's the real closure, not in getting the answers, but in understanding that not all endings come the way we want. Some arrive in silence, in a late-night knock, or in the truth finally coming to light. This was my story. One I never thought I'd tell. But it's real. It's emotional. And it's true.